Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
Within the grand intellectual theatre of the medieval Islamic world, few works command the stage with the dramatic force and enduring consequence of Abu Hamid Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Ghazali's masterwork, Tahāfut al-Falāsifa, or The Incoherence of the Philosophers, composed around 1095. This text represents a watershed moment, a sophisticated and devastating critique launched from within the heart of a civilization deeply enamoured with Greek philosophical traditions. It is a work frequently misunderstood in the West as a simple, fideistic rejection of reason. Such an interpretation is profoundly mistaken. Al-Ghazali's project was far more subtle, a surgically precise deployment of philosophical argumentation to demonstrate the inherent limitations of human reason in resolving ultimate metaphysical questions. He sought to perform an epistemological demarcation, to chart the proper domains of demonstrative proof and divine revelation, and in so doing, to dismantle the intellectual edifice of the Hellenizing philosophers, the Falāsifa, who, in his view, had arrogantly overstepped the bounds of their discipline. The Tahāfut is less a declaration of war on philosophy itself and more a brilliant internal audit, an exposé of the logical fallacies and unproven premises lurking beneath the serene surface of Neoplatonic rationalism. The intellectual environment into which Al-Ghazali launched his critique was one saturated by the legacy of Al-Farabi and, more consequentially, the towering synthesis of Avicenna or Ibn Sina. The translation movement of previous centuries had made the works of Aristotle and the Neoplatonists widely available, and these thinkers had constructed a powerful, comprehensive vision of reality. Avicenna's system, in particular, presented a seamless cosmology of emanation, where the world flowed eternally and necessarily from a perfect, unchanging first cause. This philosophical system offered compelling explanations for the universe, the human soul, and the nature of knowledge, so compelling that it appeared to many as a viable, even superior, alternative to the framework provided by Islamic scripture. The Falāsifa presented a God bound by logical necessity, a cosmos co-eternal with its creator, and a purely spiritual afterlife for the disembodied intellect. For an orthodox theologian of Al-Ghazali's stature, a leading figure of the Ash'arite school of Kalam, these conclusions were an existential threat to the core tenets of the faith: the personal, omnipotent God who creates freely in time, who knows every leaf that falls, and who promises a physical resurrection to the faithful. The Tahāfut was born of this tension, a response forged in the crucible of a personal spiritual crisis and a deep commitment to defending the foundations of revealed religion against what he saw as the hubris of pure reason. Al-Ghazali's method in the Tahāfut is its most ingenious feature. He explicitly states his intention to engage the philosophers on their own terms, to wield their preferred weapons of logic and demonstration against them. He would speak their language, refuting them using the very Aristotelian syllogisms they held in such high esteem. This approach elevates the work from a mere polemic to a profound philosophical exercise. The text is structured as a series of 20 discussions, or masail, each targeting a specific doctrine of the philosophers. Of these 20 points, Al-Ghazali identifies 3 as constituting outright unbelief kufr, while the remaining 17 are classified as dangerous innovations bid'ah. It is in his dissection of these 3 cardinal errors that the full force of his critique becomes apparent. The first charge, and perhaps the most fundamental, concerns the philosopher's doctrine of the world's preternity. Avicenna had argued from the nature of God as a perfect, unchanging cause. If the cause is eternal, the effect must be eternal. A temporal creation would imply a change in God's will, a transition from wanting to create, which would introduce imperfection into the divine essence. Al-Ghazali attacks the very foundation of this supposed logical necessity. He introduces the primacy of the divine will. The reason the world was created at a specific moment is simply because God willed it so. To the philosopher's retort, why then and why another moment? Al-Ghazali counters that this question presumes time exists prior to creation, a category error. More profoundly, he argues that a will is precisely the faculty that chooses between 2 similar alternatives. He posits that the philosopher's conception of causality is too rigid, unable to account for the nature of a genuinely free and omnipotent agent. Theology implies, constrains God to the predictable mechanics of the created world, a fatal anthropomorphism. The second damning error, in Al-Ghazali's estimation, was the philosopher's claim that God knows particulars only in a universal way. To avoid imputing change to the divine essence, Avicenna proposed that God's knowledge is static and comprehensive, encompassing all things through their universal forms, their essences, their causes. God would know man but would be unaware of the contingent, temporal states of an individual like Zaid, Facades sitting and then standing would introduce a new relation, and thus change, into the divine intellect. Al-Ghazali prosecutes this view as rendering God ignorant of the very world he is said to govern. This vision of a distant, abstract deity was irreconcilable with the Quranic God who is closer to man than his jugular vein. Al-Ghazali deconstructs a philosopher's arguments as being based on a flawed analogy between human and divine knowledge, once again revealing their unstated premises about the nature of intellect and change. The third charge of unbelief was levelled against the denial of bodily resurrection. The philosophers, following their Greek antecedents, maintained a sharp soul-body dualism. The rational soul was the immortal part of a human being, and its ultimate destiny was a purely spiritual existence, a blissful contemplation of the active intellect. The body, being composite and material, was destined for permanent decay. Al-Ghazali's refutation here is direct and powerful, resting on the absolute omnipotence of God. For a being who could create the body from disparate elements the first time, the act of reassembling it poses a trivial challenge. The philosopher's objection, he argues, derives from their empirical observation of natural processes of decay, but these processes themselves are merely the habit of nature, a custom established by God. To claim that God is bound by this habit is to deny his ultimate power. This argument segues into his most philosophically resonant and radical critique, found in the 17th discussion, the critique of causality. Here, Al-Ghazali challenges the very concept of necessary connection between cause and effect. The philosophers, and indeed common sense, hold that fire, by its nature, causes cotton to burn. Al-Ghazali, adopting the Asharite occasionalist worldview, asserts that this is a fallacy born of observation. We observe a constant conjunction between the contact of fire and the appearance of burning, but we never observe the causal power itself. Fire is an inert substance, cotton is an inert substance. The sole and direct agent of the burning is God, who creates the effect at the moment of the conjunction, running things according to a custom adat Allah. God could, if he willed, bring fire and cotton together without burning, or create burning without the presence of fire. This radical deconstruction of causality serves a dual purpose. It secures God's absolute sovereignty over every moment of existence, and it demolishes the philosopher's capacity to make claims of natural necessity that would limit divine action, such as the impossibility of bodily resurrection. In a historical irony of immense proportions, his argument prefigures by 7 centuries David Hume's famous critique of causality, which would become a cornerstone of modern Western empiricism. The Tahāfut landed with explosive force in the intellectual landscape of Sunni Islam. It rapidly became a central text in theological education, and effectively curbed the hegemonic ambitions of Avicenna philosophy. It did create a climate where Falsafa was viewed with greater suspicion in many Sunni circles, leading to a florescence of Sufism and a renewed focus on Kalam. However, the story of its reception is incomplete without its legendary antagonist. A century later, in Andalusia, the philosopher Averroes, or Ibn Rushd, composed his masterful rebuttal Tahāfut al-Tahāfut, The Incoherence of the Incoherence. Averroes mounted a spirited defense of philosophy, arguing point by point that Al-Ghazali had profoundly misunderstood and misrepresented the positions of Aristotle and his followers. Averroes contended that by denying necessary causation, Al-Ghazali was dissolving the very possibility of science and certain knowledge, opening the door to paralyzing skepticism where anything is possible at any moment. This grand debate, conducted across a century, represents one of the highest points of intellectual engagement in history. Through Latin translations, both Al-Ghazali and Averroes entered the European intellectual bloodstream, with Al-Ghazali's skeptical arguments influencing late medieval thinkers and Averroes' rigorous Aristotelianism becoming a major catalyst for the scholasticism of Thomas Ack, the long-standing Orientalist narrative that portrays Al-Ghazali as the man who single-handedly extinguished the flame of Islamic scientific and philosophical inquiry is a gross oversimplification. This view overlooks the continued vibrancy of philosophy in Shir Iran and elsewhere and misinterprets the nature of his project. His work was a reorientation, a powerful argument for epistemological humility. He sought to demonstrate that while reason is an indispensable tool for logic, mathematics, and the natural sciences, it founders when it attempts to provide certitude on metaphysical questions whose answers lie beyond its grasp, in the domain of revelation. In this, his project bears a striking structural resemblance to that of Immanuel Kant in the Critique of Pure Reason. Both thinkers undertook a profound critique of reason to establish its limits, thereby making room for faith. Both were engaged in a sophisticated demarcation project, delineating the separate magisteria of empirical investigation and metaphysical belief. Ultimately, The Incoherence of the Philosophers is a testament to the power of critical thought. It is a work of immense intellectual courage, where a master of his tradition turns the sharpest analytical tools available against the dominant, intellectual current of his age. Al-Ghazali's enduring legacy is his demonstration that the deepest questions of existence, the nature of time, the scope of divine knowledge, the mystery of causality are areas where philosophical reasoning, for all its power, may reach an impasse, revealing paradoxes and unprovable axioms. His critique stands as a timeless and unsettling reminder that the foundations of any grand system of thought, whether religious or secular, may be less coherent than its adherents presume. He forces his readers, then and now, to confront the profound question of where reason's authority ends and where the leap of faith, if it is to be taken, must begin.
We really appreciate you tuning in to this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.